resumed.
Thank you, Mitchell Taylor, for the participant Government of Canada. Mr. Commissioner, with me is Hugh McCauley. Just before I ask questions of Mr. Ryall, there was reference this morning by the witness, Mr. Commissioner, to Integrated Harvest Management Planning Committee Terms of Reference, which, as I understand it, is Exhibit 342 for your reference. Mr. Ryall, in your evidence answering questions from Ms. Baker, there was questions and then evidence about the consideration of socioeconomic factors that were given some regard to in the development of the Frizzy model, and you referred to the Gordon Gillison, I may mispronounce that, but Gordon Gillison report of 2006. What did that report tell fisheries that was of assistance in considering socioeconomic factors in either developing the Frizzy model or the amendments to it or escapement generally?
Can I ask just if I believe that report is an evidence that it's not? I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same report.
Yes.
Is it possible to give me an exhibit reference number for that report?
It's not possible from me, because I wondered that same question, although I thought it wasn't an exhibit. If it is, I'm not alive to it.
Just Boris Tyzik for the record. I know the one that we put in was a different one, and the one that was referred to by Mr. Lowe's in the recreational fishery was a different Gislason report. He's done a fair number of reports. So I'm not aware of this one, Commissioner.
Well, I want to make sure we're talking about the same report.
Yeah. Maybe before we proceed, Mr. Ryall, can you remember the name of the report that apparently was done in 2006 by Mr. Gillison that you were referring to?
The actual title, no. I do happen to have a copy here with me. That's not any particular reason besides to refresh my memory what it said. But
Do you mind just having a look at it then and reading the title?
yeah.
It's And then what I would propose, Mr. Commissioner, once we've got the title, we'll leave it with Mr. Lund for a few minutes to see what he comes up with, and then that no doubt will answer if it is or isn't an exhibit already, and we'll go from there.
The title is, excuse me. The title is Fraser River Sockeye Management Social Economic Implications, June 8th, 2006.
All right. Would it be okay then, Mr. Commissioner, if we come back to that once we get a handle on whether it is or isn't an exhibit?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Ryall, what did that report give to the department, or what benefit did the department get in terms of information or ideas or things of that nature as to developing or amending Frizzy or on escapement generally?
Well, so in 2006, we had looked at 3 options, and they were driven, my recollection is, by this objective function that people did not particularly like. So I think what it showed us is, as far as Mr. Giselson's report was, first off, that we needed to look at some other performance indicators. And I've talked about a couple here today. We did look at a whole range of performance indicators, but we ended up choosing the 3 that are, or 4 that we plot on the graphs typically.
And is that based on what Mr. Gillison was recommending or suggesting?
He didn't make explicit recommendations along those lines. You know, it was more, he had quite a number of performance indicators within his report, and I guess it really started us thinking about, well, what are we trying, information are we trying to convey to people?
All right.
He also did, in his recommendation, and I did speak about my answer earlier, is that in his report, Mr. Giselson did point out that this report, has come to some conclusions. Well, also one of his conclusions was that additional work needed to be done on particularly on the economic analysis, and that he had to make quite a series of assumptions to come up with his economic analysis.
Well, in that regard and generally, has there been other work done or steps taken by fisheries to get a handle or understanding of socioeconomic factors, and then using that to inform that other work, if any, to inform the work in amending Frizzy or on escapement generally?
No, not at this time. I do think that it is a gap. I think that if we were to make additional changes, and this was not reviewed through the science process that I talked about. Really, that's not their preview to get into the economic analysis. But I do think that that it is a gap that we could incorporate an economic analysis, taking the output from the Frizzy and adding that on as another component or module, if you will, to the actual model itself.
All right. Mr. Lunn, is there any word on whether that is an exhibit?
It is not an exhibit.
All right, thank you. It's undoubtedly not subject of notice so far. I think it probably should be an exhibit. In the interest of time, and there's one copy there, I will see what I can do with other council at the noon hour to see if we can bring it back and put it in as an exhibit, Mr. Commissioner.
May I respectfully suggest, Mr. Taylor, we mark it for identification purposes first, let council see it.
All right.
And then if they have any submissions they wish to make on it, you could hear those submissions and address them accordingly, so that way we know what the document is that he has been addressing. Council will have a chance to appropriately consider it, and then we can hear any concerns or submissions they might want to make.
All right.
Perhaps we could just get the hard copy and for now, just mark that for identification purposes.
May we take your copy, Mr. Ryall, and then we'll get you another one? Is it a clean copy, Mr. Ryall?
I think so. I was just going to check, but I'm pretty sure it is.
It'll be marked for identification, letter V.
Just intrigued on that now that there's apparently quite a number of exhibits for identification before V, so I'll have to have a look at that.
You're going to have to come every day, Mr. Taylor.
Apparently. And mentioned to someone we should have the numbered exhibits as well, or the lettered exhibits as well as the numbered ones. Moving along, Mr. Ryall, do you see alternatives to Frizzy in terms of arriving at escapement targets? Frizzy is what's used, but is there anything else that is realistic or has been contemplated to be used other than Frizzy?
I don't see that in the near future. I think a number of times I've made presentations. I mentioned the IHPC, and I remember Mr. Wilson being, and I think Mr. Wilson remains concerned about the Frizzy model. I asked Mr. Wilson if he had any alternatives, and none were forthcoming. And as I mentioned in my earlier comments on this, I do see that, things evolve. I've worked on constructing models earlier in my career, and those ones are no longer used. Why is that? Well, better ones come along. And so I do see that probably some year down the road there will be improvements made to this one. And but as far as the overall concepts go, I think more importantly, do I see changes in that? I don't think significantly. Maybe better ways of doing the analysis is what I'm really saying, and not so much do I see different ways in thinking about these concepts.
Okay, thank you. Now, this set or part of the evidentiary hearings is on decision-making and consultation, and a number of witnesses have given evidence about decision-making processes, but I wonder if you could briefly roll up and give the Commissioner a quick Coles Notes kind of statement as to an overview of the DFO decision-making process, setting out how DFO's priorities and decisions are made, starting, if you like, from the beginning or high level, and then bringing it through to the on-the-ground decisions that occur.
I certainly could do that. I also wonder, I've heard it from looking past records of what's been talked about at the commission already by previous witnesses about whether it would be helpful actually to have the department putting something forward about decision making and how it's undertaken within the department. I think I heard one of the earlier witnesses speak about concerns about how decision-making is arrived at within the department, and I can see from someone from sitting outside that they might wonder, well, we've told you all these things, but how did you actually consider them? But to address your question, to me it really does start right back from a speech from the throne that's going to provide direction to all the departments, and taking that direction and incorporating that into the department's activities. In addition, each minister does receive a letter from the Privy Council office about what the priorities of the day are. Those priorities are incorporated into a plan for the department as a whole, and within the Pacific region, to filter this down into the next layer, what the Pacific region's role is going to be on delivering on those priorities and initiatives. And they change over time, depending on what direction one gets right directly from that speech from the throne. And then as far as decision making goes, it really depends on, the hierarchy of what's being decided. And when I say the hierarchy, I guess I'm really meaning the impact. So if it's a very large impact and many people or major implications on potentially changes in direction, you're going to be looking at senior management that are going to be making those decisions that will be informed from technical advice. And it could be doing an analysis of conservation and economics on a decision around Cultus Lake Sockeye, for example, and I would think that type of decision will be taken at a high level within the department, and up to including the minister. Similarly, the Integrated Fishery Management Plan is a ministerial decision at the end. But then you start to filter these down. You now have a management plan that's been agreed to by the minister. And you start filtering that down into decisions that are going to make that into an operational plan, and people within the department are delegated the authority to make those decisions. So another example would be chair of the Fraser panel. One of the roles I've played in the past, I would have authority to make decisions around fisheries that are consistent with that management plan the minister has approved. So, there's this whole nested layer of hierarchies of who has decisions and who needs to be involved, and I think looking from the outside it could be a matter of a bit of a black box sometimes, like who is making those decisions.
I understand there's something prepared in the Pacific region that is an implementation plan. You're familiar with that?
Yes, we were just actually working on one for the next year.
What time horizon does it cover, and how does it fit into the decision-making process that you have outlined at a very broad level?
Well, there's one, that looks 5 years out. There's also others that you'll do on an annual basis, and on those annual basis, you'll have one for the Pacific region that matches up with the overall departmental direction. And then you take that down a layer, and currently I'm responsible for developing management plans for other species, and so I'll have people that are tasked, and for each one of those they'll have work plans. So I'll have my staff develop work plans, and they'll roll up into meeting what we need for resource management and meeting those objectives. So you can kind of reverse it back, like what are the priorities and how are you going to meet them, and what are you going to do with those resources that you've been provided to meet those objectives and initiatives.
Is an implementation plan prepared each year, or only every so many years?
Well, the one that's going to look out over 5 years, and then each year what I'm referring to is what sort of changes have occurred, what sort of direction does one get from the speech from the throne, and that could modify where the direction's going. But some of those things don't change very much, But it could be a particular initiative that's undertaken that's identified. One major one recently within the Pacific region is the Pacific Integrated Fisheries Initiative, PICFI. And so those get added onto the list, and then how you're going to incorporate those into your business. And that was over a number of years, and so you need to incorporate that into your activities.
All right, you've been with the department quite a number of years. Have you seen decision-making become more complex over the years that you've been with DFO?
I would answer yes. I think it has become more complex, I think, for two reasons. One is that there's more parties involved and more parties have more views, and so that's added a layer of complexity. I also think that the way that we've thought, and I'm going to answer primarily around salmon, but I think it's across other species, the way that we think about how we make decisions in harvesting is, in the past, when I first started the department, I think was much more of a narrow focus around single species, and there are considerations for others, but those now we're looking at more of an ecosystem approach and how to incorporate that into the decision making. And so I think both those things have added a layer of complexity into the overall decision making process.
Has the case law decisions that have come down over the last 15, 20 years, mainly to do with First Nation fishing, has that added a level of complexity to things?
I would say that's added a significant layer of complexity. I've been thinking about crafting management plans for sure. Yeah.
And partly as a result of that, and generally, is there more or the same or less consultation now than a decade or more ago?
Significantly more than a decade ago. I would say there's more. I started with the department in 1989. Consultation was undertaken back in those years as well, but not to the extent that it is now in 2011 by any stretch. I think that if I look around my staff and ask them to add up how much time is spent on consultation, it would be a significant amount of time that we spend. I do also start to think about going into the future, are there ways that we can make improvements to the processes that we have underway as around consultation? And is the current model the best one that we have? I start to think about, are there other models around that we should be considering for consultation processes? I did touch on a little bit in my answer about thinking about co-management, that we've had discussions with First Nations around this issue, and there's a whole spectrum of what co-management means to one party to another, and there's so much one can do with existing legislation as well. But so start to think about what sort of efficiencies, not just efficiencies, but more effective consultation that one can do as well.
Is consultation seen as beneficial for the department in its decision making?
I would say absolutely, it is beneficial. I do think that the consultation ends up in resulting in improved management plans. I'm not going to say that everyone agrees with the outcome. That would just not be a correct statement, but I do think that the consultation and advice that we receive ends up in a better product.
Financial support that DFO provides to various participants in the Integrated Harvest Management Planning Committee process and otherwise. Can you say what is the department's view on providing financial support to commercial for-profit fishers to attend meetings with DFO?
Well, I guess we look in within our existing budgets and what their priorities are, and currently within the commercial sector, as I indicated earlier, we do provide financial support to attend the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee to all representatives that attend, and I'm speaking here of salmon. And we do not provide that support for commercial representatives for the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board as far as their travel expenses. The department's commitment within the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board is to provide expenses for the meeting location, room rentals, and also providing some technical support by having DFO staff attend and provide information and discussion.
You mentioned earlier that the financial support for the SFAB has been stable over the years, as I heard your evidence. What can you say about financial participation for First Nation fishers, both communities and umbrella organizations? Has it changed over the years, up or down, or has remained about the same?
More of a challenging question to answer. I would think it has been quite stable. And I'm thinking here in the last 5 years of when I provide that answer. I would think that it has increased. If we go back into the early 90s, it probably increased greatly, and in more recent times it's been quite stable. But it's hard to, to tease out as well. There's a host of arrangements with First Nations on a variety of topics, and so if we're just talking about consultation, it's a little bit challenging sometimes to tease that out of all the different agreements that we have with First Nations in the Pacific region. I mean, there's line items in there. I'm just saying it'd be a challenge to go back and review that. Take some effort.
Turning to, or coming back to the Integrated Harvest Management or Harvest Planning Committee, do you see that as an effective means for DFOs obtaining input and advice from stakeholder groups? You've touched on this before, but I ask you again, and ask you if you see it as an effective means. And then my next question will be what changes or improvements might be made?
Well, I think my involvement in having the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee set up, what started, I believe it was in either late 2003 or 2004. And prior to having the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee, we really did not have a really, first off, we didn't have an integrated forum. We had a, I'm going to say ad hoc, and there was a discussion paper put out that made around improved decision making, and it gave a summary of the pre-existing bodies, both within areas and the region. And some of those bodies have been in existence for quite a while. The Sport Fishing Advisory Board, for example, and they had a whole process of to set up and provide advice to the department. There was not an existing environmental marine conservation caucus. The commercial advisory process had a host of advisory bodies that we consulted on, but there was no one cohesive organization. And so there was a desire to make improvements on that. And so we set up the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee. I think the first meeting was 2005, and I was involved on a regular day-to-day basis with the IHPC up until about 2009. And I did see significant improvements over those 4 years, with the IHPC. From people first starting getting into a room, thinking about, like, why are we here? And I'd much rather, this is a little bit uncomfortable, to now providing, I think, and having a constructive dialogue around the management plans. I think that representation from First Nations at these meetings is still not as what we'd like to see. From our viewpoint within the Department of Fisheries, we've had quite a number of discussions with First Nations, and I talked about some of the other forums where we're trying to see how we can make some improvements, and maybe that will lead to representation in the IHPC.
All right, is there anything specific that you want to relate to the Commissioner as to what is being done to try and increase First Nation participation?
Well, I think in two fronts, one specifically around Fraser sockeye, but in Fraser salmon in general. There's a forum, a conservation and fisheries forum that is on looking at more operational details, and I think their next one is planned for May. And so that's dealing with the current existing arrangements, and then looking further down the road, there's an organization or a process called as a roadmap. And initially they were joint, and we found that was not really working. Have now separated. There's overlap between the membership. But this roadmap process is trying to see if there's ways that one could improve upon the consultation, and I think really so far focus more upon the bilateral arrangements between First Nations and DFO. And the other, to me, is looking at the First Nation Fishery Council as another potential vehicle for this as well. It's relatively new, but I do and am encouraged from the last annual meeting that I attended in November of last year of how that organization is also structured and making gains on how they view moving ahead as well. So those are two examples, and there are others that I could talk about but we're trying to, and the other part of it too is around co-management, and what does that mean? There's quite a whole range of co-management views, and so we're having those discussions as well.
All right. Now, I'd like to
Taylor, I wonder if I could just quickly add, or ask rather, the witness. You didn't mention in that long list treaty negotiations. Can you tell me, to the extent that treaty negotiations include discussions around fisheries, how that works in terms of all of these other layers of consultations that are taking place?
Well, that's definitely a significant part. However, not all First Nations are involved in those treaty negotiations, and so I guess one of our challenges within the department, certainly treaties are a key component. If we had treaties throughout and agreements upon that, I think that would be ideal, but I'm not sure. I don't think that is the situations and agreements with First Nations, and a number of them are not involved in treaty discussions. So I think, to me, that's a reality, and so you need to deal with the reality as well, that what sort of organizations does one need to get the input from currently from First Nations that are not interested in pursuing treaties. They're definitely still interested and do have rights identified as far as food and social ceremonial and maybe others, and so one needs to take that into consideration as well.
How is that taken into consideration?
In addition to the treaties, you mean?
Well, no. If there are discussions, I'm sorry, I apologize, Mr. Taylor. If there are discussions taking place at treaty tables around issues regarding fisheries, how is that meshed with all of the other discussions that are taking place, or is it meshed at all with the other discussions that are taking place around the other organizations or forums that you just mentioned? Mm-hmm.
Well, right now, there's a treaty, as you well know, with the Nisga'a, another is with Tsawwassen, and so those arrangements and how they would mesh with the overall consultative process, I still, especially right now with Tsawwassen, needs to be incorporated into the overall process too, and that's not totally clear at this point.
I see, okay.
The Manolt Treaty, Mr. Commissioner, as I understand it, comes into force April 1st, for your information, so there'll be, as of then, another treaty in British Columbia. That's on the west coast of Vancouver Island, not directly bearing on the Fraser Sockeye, I expect. But as I heard the Commissioner, he's asking, how do discussions and consultation in the various processes you've described fit and or are taken into account with any discussions in the treaty process at the tables where there are some, if any, ongoing discussions, and vice versa back? That's what I took to be what the Commissioner might be getting at when he was asking about meshing. How does one inform and relate to the other? So we don't yet have a treaty, but we might have a treaty if discussions went down a good path.
Maybe I misunderstood the question, but I mean, if we're still in discussions around treaties with a First Nation or a group of First Nations, and with the people that are doing the negotiations and with resource management staff, we would be providing advice that would be incorporated into those negotiations.
All right, thank you. Now, I want to take you to a number of documents that bear on consultation and ask if you can identify them, and if you can, then I'm going to ask that they be marked as an exhibit. I don't need to take you into the documents, in part because of time constraints. And I alert you, Mr. Lunn, as we head into this, that I've got a slightly longer list than the one I passed you. But if we go to tab 5 and bring it up on the screen of Canada's list of documents that were handed in for this session, There's a document entitled Consultation Framework it says for fisheries, but I guess it means by fisheries, and I think it's going to come up on the screen, the title page anyhow.
Do you have a can ID?
Oh, sorry, yes, let me do that. CAN 056910.
Thank you.
Is that better than giving you a tab number?
Tab is okay, I just wasn't quite sure what that was.
That's the document I'm thinking of. Do you, and maybe you could just show Mr. Ryall the very next page, just to give him a date, and then back to this page. So that's March 2004, and you've got a binder there as well. Do you recognize that document, Mr. Ryall?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
Well, it's a document that was put together by Fisheries and Oceans and to provide some guidance around consultation processes and why one would undertake them and how to undertake them.
Okay, I'm going to ask that that be an exhibit, please.
Exhibit number 594.
I'd like to take you next to CAN 022784, which is also tab 6. And you would have that in front of you again, Mr. Ryall, which appears to be March 2004 as well. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
And what is that, and does it relate in some way to the document we just looked at?
Well, it relates to the former. I would say the former, well, this one in particular is more down into operational details here of like how one would go out and start setting up a consultation process, and gets into these details around who would participate, what you're actually trying to go out and consult on, identify those participants, set out a timeline. So more into the operational details of how you have to go out. Once you've decided what you're going to consult on, here are some of the things that one could consider and should consider in preparation for that consultation and design.
So if you like, it's a document that's underneath the document we just looked at, is it?
Well, that's the way I would view it, yes.
May this document, CAN 022784, be an exhibit, please?
Exhibit number 595.
Then if we turn to CAN 063627, which is tab 7, tab 7, Mr. Lunn. There's a document that you can see there, consultation with First Nations best practices, June of 2006. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
I think the title tells us something about what it is, but what is this document?
Well, it has overlap with the previous one, but this one also has some examples of best practices in it of what has been undertaken as examples of best practices.
This is specific to consultation with First Nations, I gather.
That's correct.
And is this incorporating the principles from the cases known as Haida and Taku?
They're included in here as well, yes.
May this be an exhibit, please?
Number 596.
One more document in this series. If we turn to a document that I think has not got a CAN number, but it's at tab 8, Mr. Lunn, if you have that. Yes, that's the one. Do you recognize that document, Mr. Ryall?
Yes, I do.
And what is this?
Just discussed around Aboriginal consultation and interim guidelines to fulfill the legal duty to consult. It has some overlap in providing some guidance, and then also in some details how to undertake consultation to meet those obligations.
Is this document we're looking at now a Canada or government-wide document, Government of Canada-wide document as distinct from fisheries only?
That's my understanding, yes.
May this be the next exhibit, please?
Exhibit 597.
Now, just while we're in documents, and I think quickly, Mr. Ryall.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Commissioner, we have very serious time constraints today, and I proposed some limits on people's time overnight to try and make sure everybody got an opportunity to ask questions of this witness. The proposal I made for Canada was 30 minutes, which has now been exceeded by 5. BC has 20 minutes, which I was hoping could be completed before the lunch break. So I'm wondering how much longer Mr. Taylor intends to be with this witness and how that works with the time available today.
Well, I'm trying to move things along as quickly as I can. 30 minutes wasn't my time estimate. That was what Ms. Baker gave me. My time estimate was an hour. Ultimately, I came back at 45. I'm in 35 at the moment, apparently, and I'm aiming for 45. That's my best target right now.
Of course, I know it doesn't sound like very much, 10 minutes, but that means those 10 minutes come off of somebody else's time. So,
Ms. Gertner is giving me some, but she can explain.
I'm quite worried about the day as it is already, Mr. Commissioner, and the nature of the content of it. I'm going to consider over lunch whether or not it's best to even try to do my cross-examination today and whether there is other options, and I'm going to speak to Ms. Baker about that.
Thank you. I'll proceed, and I'll try to be as efficient with time as possible. I've got 3 documents that I want to have you look at, Mr. Ryall, and then I will ask that they be exhibits if you identify them. And why I want to do that is that on February 11th, Mr. Leadham, who's counsel for the Conservation Coalition, entered certain letters from environmental groups to DFO regarding fisheries management plans, and those exhibits are now 424, 425, and 427. Obviously, there's a 426 in the middle there, which I will come back to. Now, Mr. Lunn, if this is technically possible, are we able to bring up 424 and tab 9, which is CAN 056345 on the screen together? Okay, that's one version of on the screen together, I guess, but
what would you like to do?
My question, Mr. Ryall, is whether the top of the screen is a DFO response to the bottom of the screen. Now, for Mr. Ryall to properly assess that, I suppose he should be able to see, oh, that's a better way of doing it, thank you. So the right, which was there, the right-hand side, Mr. Ryall, is a letter coming into DFO, and more specifically you, it looks like. And the left side of the screen is seemingly a letter back. If you just have a moment to look at those, the right side of the screen is Exhibit 424, and my question of you is whether you can identify the left side and whether it is a response to 424, the right side.
Well, it certainly looks to be. Just looking at the response back August the 31st, 2009, it references the March 4th, 2009 letter that came in, and I don't think there would have been 2 on the same day, and they look like they're covering the topics in my reply of August 31st, 2009.
All right.
Looks like it's covering off what was submitted on March the 4th.
Thank you. I'm going to call it the left side of the screen, the August 31st, 2009 letter be the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 598.
Now, I'd like to do the same with Exhibit 425 and tab 10, and tab 10 is CAN 055783. So this is a letter coming into fisheries on June 25th, 2007. And, sorry, Mr. Lund's testing me. The incoming's on the left side now and the outgoing's on the right side.
Right.
The incoming is May 23, 2007, and the outgoing is June 25, 2007. The left side is Exhibit 425. Can you recognize the right side as a response to the left side?
Yes, the the right side, the June 25th, 2007, references that this is a reply to your letter of May the 23rd, 2007, and around management plans.
All right, thank you. May the right side, June 25, 207, be the next exhibit, please?
599.
And then next, the same thing with exhibit 427 and tab 11, and I'm going to watch my right and left sides this time. And tab 11 is CAN 042500. The left side is a letter that is exhibit 427. The right side is a letter from the minister, and you may not be able to say too much more than what's obvious there, Mr. Ryall, as to whether the right side is a response to the left side.
Yes, it is. The minister is referencing two letters, June 17th and the 28th, and the one up on the left side is the June 28th incoming.
All right. So I'd ask that the right side, September 7, 205, be marked as the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit number 600.
Thank you. We've reached another milestone, I guess, in terms of exhibit numbers, 600 now.
No prizes.
One final document, Mr. Lunn, I'm sorry I didn't alert you to this, but it's in the series. Exhibit 426. That's another letter that was sent to Fisheries, Mr. Ryall. You may not be able to answer this question, but do you have any knowledge whether that letter was answered?
I don't have any knowledge, but when letters come in, our practice would be to provide replies back to the letters.
All right.
I'd have to go look in the records.
This appears to be a letter that would have been sent to the committee. Is that your understanding? Which would include fisheries.
Well, just refresh my memory around this. I guess the other part of, a letter may come in, but if there's no particular question in it, I don't think we're going to answer it either. And if this is to a committee and not addressed to DFO, I'm not sure that we would have answered it.
All right, thank you.
Is there a signature page, Mr. Taylor, on that?
Mr. Lunt, this is from a number of conservation organizations.
Right.
Mr. Ryall, very quickly, can you describe what is the consultation secretariat within the DFO Pacific region and what does it do?
Well, it performs a number of functions. I think really it came out of the improved decision to making document was one of the end results is that we needed to have a consultation secretariat, and well, why did we need that? It provides a resource. It helps staff develop consultation plans, put them together and ask the questions around those documents you were showing me earlier, like who do you need to consult with, what are you really asking, how are you going to do it, what sort of budget do you need to do these sort of consultations. That's one role they fill. And so they're a resource that helps staff develop consultations and address questions. The other role that they fill, there's a website, consultation secretariat website, and on that website there's a record of meetings, minutes, agendas, times. I also post on there up and coming consultation items from across the department. And so that covers everything. It's not just salmon, but all species. And so that's a valuable resource of tracking consultations and what's going on and helping staff undertake consultations.
All right, thank you. Earlier in these proceedings, specifically February 10th, Dr. Carl Walters gave some evidence. And am I right that you know who Dr. Carl Walters is?
Yes, I know Dr. Walters quite well.
And in the February 10th transcript, and is that available, Mr. Lynn? At page 61, at line 26, you'll see the evidence there where Dr. Walters speaks to a need to return to simpler overriding objectives, clear priorities, a hierarchical objective, and decision-making with regard to allocation amongst user groups, always with conservation first. There are a lot of ways to improve the decision process, simplify and improve the decision process to make it look more like the Salmon Commission's process did. Do you have a comment or response to what Dr. Walters is saying there?
Well, I mostly agree with what is saying there. I think, we do have overriding objectives and clear priorities, and those objectives are laid out in various policies. Salmon allocation policy being one, lays out the principles of allocation. Conservation being first, First Nations FSC second, and has those listed in a hierarchical fashion. And also, and so I could go on about other policy, but a summary to me is that we do lay those out, I think, in a clear fashion. And then I think maybe the only quibble I have with it is about the simpler part and the simplifying. I think that we talked earlier this morning about some of the things that have changed over the course of time, and thinking that we're going to return to some simpler view may not be available to us just because of the complexity of what has changed, and that would be a challenge. But to me, I do agree with overall of what Dr. Walters has put forward here, and we need to have those types of objectives and need to be clear about and make sure that they're put out, and people understand, well, what are you managing to, and what are your objectives, and how do you set priorities, and how do you follow those?
Dr. Walters, in that same area of evidence, I don't have the line reference or page for that matter, but he referred to DFO's decision-making processes as pathological. Do you have a response or comment on that?
Well, maybe two. I'm not sure that pathological is the right adjective in this particular case, but setting aside that as well, I do think what he was making a point was that his view is that the decision making within the department is not always clear, when I followed up with the section that we just talked about, really, are we saying anything different? I'm not sure that we are, and my earlier comments earlier is that if you're outside the department, I do think it's probably true that people would say, well, how do you arrive at that decision? And it could be viewed as a black box, and the last thing that we see is maybe a release that here's our decision without how you arrive there. So from Dr. Walters' point of view is that maybe that's why he chose to use the word pathological. I don't know.
It's up on your screen now. It's page 59, and just for the record, Mr. Lowe's is suggesting that there might have been another angle to what Dr. Walters was speaking about. I don't want to take my time arguing about it, though.
Well, I just noticed that the top of the paragraph, not this, the previous one, was referring to Dr. Walters was referring to the decision-making process under the wild salmon policy, and that was the context of his statement.
Well, that's fine. We can leave it there. It was a comment he made in the escapement decision-making as a general point part of these proceedings. But the witness has given his answer to it. My final question, Mr. Ryall, which has two parts to it, is we've heard about structured decision-making. Can you briefly describe what is structured decision-making, which is, as I understand it, a term of art, and how is that used by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in the escapement and frizzy modeling?
Well, I think it's it's just a name for a process. And so what do you do in a structured decision making? I think a number of steps. One is you need to identify what the problem is first and what the issue is. That's the first step, I think. And then if once you're in agreement on what your problem is you're trying to solve, and then what are the objectives you're trying to achieve, and then you get into starting to think about how you're going to assess those, and coming up with some analysis process, and that would include some indicators to see how well different scenarios match up against solving your problem. And quite often that's an iterative process, because when you first come up with these scenarios, you might not think of the one you end up as the outcome. So it can often be a reiterative process to end up with ideally a consensus or an agreed upon scenario. Sometimes you might only end up with narrowing a range of 10 options down to 3, but you've made improvement about what sort of outcomes one could then look at implementing. I think we've tried within the Frizzy process to do that in a couple ways. I would argue that within the wild salmon policy, there's an Appendix 2 that has a 5-step process that to me is a structured decision making. You can take it into a next step and start developing analytical tools to take a look at these different options and rank them or categorize them, if you will, of preferred, least preferred, okay, that kind of categorization. And we did do that with the cultist example, and looked at a range of options and how we could recover cultists with applying enhancement and habitat changes. And that was used in an analytical tool to help that process. We also did it within the Frizzy process, and I think that also assisted us when we used that analytical tool, but we never provided enough time to use it fully. And if I had to go back and do it again, I'd probably look at a different way of applying that. And with not such a large number of people, there was probably 40 people in the room, and that's a challenge, I think, and probably different ways of undertaking that kind of process.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ryall.
Mr. Commissioner, the Gillison document that was referred to by Mr. Ryall, we've found the CAN number for that. It's CAN 007899 for my friends to think about over the break. And I do note that we're now behind schedule. We've got over 2 hours of time estimates left on my reduced schedule, which I may or may not be adhered to by my friends. So we do probably have a problem this afternoon on completing with Mr. Ryall. I don't know if you want to address that now. Well, we have a whole minute left before the break to talk about that. But we either, people do need to either share or reduce their time estimates, or we have to ask Mr. Ryall to come back and make some more time for him in the schedule, which I don't think is likely where we stand today and where we're moving forward, or we have to do it in writing, or we sit later today. Those are our options as I see them.
Right, thank you, Ms. Baker. Well, we won't be sitting beyond 4 today. The next option is for council to attempt to reduce their time estimates. If that can't be done, my suggestion is that those with the shortest time estimates complete this afternoon. Those who have much longer ones, or they might get started this afternoon or even complete this afternoon, they can reduce them, but it would be to consider, as Mr. Rosenblum did with a different panel, putting questions in writing to a witness. It might be possible to bring the witness back for a short stint, an hour or so, just to address any points that come out of the written answers that the witness would provide. It could be by way of affidavit, or in Mr. Rosenblum's case, it was by way of a written set of answers that were adopted by the witness when he returned under oath, to do it that fashion. But the reality check is when we leave this room, each and every one of us has got meetings to go to and preparation to do and reading to accomplish, so it's a constant workload problem, and it's also a constant challenge for Commission Council to keep the hearings within the time frame that we have available for the viva voce testimony. So up to this point, all council have been extremely gracious and helpful in addressing our time crunch concerns, and have been, for the most part, able to accommodate the need to complete these panels as we go through them. So I think that's the first step. Can people reduce their time estimates? If not, then there's either put the questions in writing or a combination thereof, and try to accommodate those with shorter time estimates so that they can get completed this afternoon if at all possible. Thank you.
Hearing is now adjourned until 2 p.m.